Her name is Ariana Blake, and what happened to her will shake you. Stopped by 2 local cops for nothing but driving a luxury car while black, Ariana was calm, until they demanded a bribe. When she refused, they exploded with racist slurs, illegally arrested her, and humiliated her in public. But the biggest mistake? They had no idea who she was. What happens when the truth about Ariana comes out will leave you speechless. Racism, corruption, and justice collide in this shocking story. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now so you never miss stories that expose the truth. She didn't know this would be the day everything broke. Ariana Blake, proud, brilliant, strong, just wanted to go home after a long meeting. But the red and blue lights behind her weren't just a traffic stop. They were a warning. Something cruel was coming. She pulled over, confused. She had done nothing wrong. The 2 officers approached slowly, eyes cold, grins sharp. One asked for her license. The other circled the car like a shark smelling blood. Then came the lie. You were speeding. She wasn't. They knew it. She knew it. But it wasn't about the speed. It was about her skin, her success, her silence. When Ariana calmly asked for the radar reading, their faces tightened. One officer's lips curled. The other leaned in closer. "Look," he said, rubbing his fingers together. "We can handle this easy. You give us something, we let you go." Her heart thudded. She stared at him, too stunned to speak. A bribe, a threat, a trap. She refused. Firm, proud, unafraid, but they didn't like that. The mood shifted. The fake politeness was gone. What came next was pure hate. "Get out of the car," one barked, hand already reaching for his cuffs. Ariana kept her voice even. "You have no grounds to detain me. I will call my attorney." That was it. The final spark. "Resisting," the officer snarled. "Disobeying orders." Lies stacked like bricks around her. Before she could speak again, she was yanked from her seat, arms twisted painfully behind her back, wrists crushed in metal cuffs. "You think you're special?" they jeered. "Just another mouthy one. You all think you're above the law." Slurs followed. Racist, vile, dehumanizing. And all Ariana could do was stand tall as they dragged her across the road like a criminal. She tried to speak, to shout, to reason, but they laughed louder. They shoved her into the squad car like she was nothing, like she didn't matter, like she wasn't deputy director of the FBI. Her title didn't matter to them. Her accomplishments didn't matter. To them, she was just a black woman in a nice car, and that meant she needed to be knocked down. In the back seat, Ariana's hands bled. Her jaw clenched. Her soul burned. She memorized their faces, the car number. Every word, every threat. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But she couldn't. Not now. Not here. Not with these men in control. So she sat, breathing hard, staring through the wire divider, waiting. Plotting, praying. The patrol car pulled away from the curb, leaving her Mercedes behind like a forgotten thing. On the ride to the station, they taunted her, said she looked too clean, to be honest, called her names, dared her to fight back, said they'd ruin her, that no one would believe her, that people like her always ended up crying in the end. She said nothing. She watched the clock. She counted each second. She waited for her moment. When they reached the station, they didn't even lower their voices. "Got a feisty one officer told the desk sergeant. Mouthy, disrespectful, thought she knew her rights. They shoved her toward the counter, still cuffed, still bleeding. She stood tall, her face was blank, but inside she was screaming. They thought they'd broken her. They had no idea. The desk sergeant looked at her ID, read her name, then read it again. Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. recognition. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Occupation? Ariana took a breath, then said it clear and calm. Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence was instant, thick, electric. The sergeant froze. The officers blanched. One dropped his hand to his side, the other backed away. No, he muttered. No, that's not possible. But it was. Ariana didn't flinch. She looked them dead in the eye and said, "Get your commander, now." And just like that, the story cracked open. They had arrested a top federal official. They had insulted her, assaulted her, framed her, humiliated her. And now? Now, they were the ones facing questions, facing cameras, facing justice. But none of that erased the pain. None of it made up for the moment her dignity was stolen in broad daylight, when her wrists were cut and her voice ignored. She had fought to stay calm, to stay strong. She had fought to escape their trap. But she failed. Because the truth is, when you're black in America, even being the deputy director of the FBI doesn't make you safe. You'd think the story ends here. That justice came, and Ariana walked away whole. But no, the damage was done. Her skin still stung from the cuffs. Her memory replayed every insult. And her heart, that fierce heart, was heavier than ever. Because for every Ariana who fights back, there are thousands more who don't get the chance. That's why this story matters. That's why you need to remember her name. Ariana Blake. Subscribe to this channel to hear stories like this. True, powerful, and unforgettable. Because the truth deserves to be told, and because the fight for justice is far from over. The silence after Ariana Blake revealed her identity as Deputy Director of the FBI wasn't just awkward. It was bone-deep, paralyzing, and terrifying. The kind of silence that rearranges a room. She stood tall, still bleeding from the cuffs, still shaking from the rage boiling inside her. But on the outside, she was unmovable. And across from her, the two officers who had arrested her, Kowski and Jenkins, stood frozen as if hearing her words shattered their world. They had chained, cursed, and insulted her. They had forced her head down like she was trash. Now they realized they had done it all to one of the most powerful law enforcement figures in the country. But Ariana didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She didn't scream. She only spoke clearly, calmly, and with complete authority. Release me. Call your commander. Notify the FBI field office. And do it now. But pain has a way of echoing, even when justice arrives. As the cuffs were unlocked with trembling fingers, Ariana's hands were red and bruised, her wrists cut where the metal had bitten in. No apology could erase that. Not the sergeant's awkward stammering, not the pitiful pleading of the two officers now kneeling before her. And when her superior agents from the FBI arrived, rushing in with pale faces and frantic urgency, she gave them the minimum explanation required, her voice colder than they'd ever heard. Because this wasn't about being an agent anymore. This was about being a black woman in America. And no title had shielded her. The investigation launched that same night, swift, fierce, and thorough. Kowski and Jenkins were suspended on the spot, disarmed and dragged into isolated interrogation rooms. Dashcam footage was secured. Logs were pulled. Every past complaint against them was reopened. But as the FBI agents worked, Ariana sat alone in the back conference room, watching the slow bruise forming on her arm from where Jenkins had grabbed her. She felt every moment replay in her mind, like broken glass. The fake accusations, the handcuffs, the drive to the station, the slurs that still rang in her ears like poison. She had survived many things. She had worked her way up in the bureau with discipline, brilliance, and grit. She had endured being doubted, dismissed, interrupted, and ignored in rooms filled with men who saw her skin first and her credentials last. But this was different. This wasn't just a microaggression or a condescending smirk. This was violence. This was humiliation. This was her body being dragged, her dignity being spat on, her silence being weaponized. And worse, she knew she wasn't alone. She thought of her niece, only 21, driving home from college alone at night. She thought of her brother, a decorated army officer, once stopped and questioned for walking in the wrong neighborhood in uniform. She thought of the names she had written in her journals. The names of people lost to police violence, the names America sometimes forgot too quickly. That night, when she finally returned home, she stood in her garage and stared at her parked Mercedes for a long time. The same car that had made her a target. The same car that, in another timeline, could have gotten her killed. She walked inside slowly. The house was quiet. She sat on the edge of her bed and didn't move for an hour. Her phone buzzed constantly. Calls from Washington, texts from colleagues, messages from civil rights lawyers and media contacts who had somehow already heard. But Ariana didn't answer. She stared at the floor, trying to understand the aching inside her. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about how easily it happened. About how even she, someone with power, training, and a badge, was still vulnerable. The days that followed were brutal. Not just for the officers, but for Ariana too. The media storm was immediate and blinding. Headlines like FBI Deputy Director illegally arrested by local police lit up the nation. Some praised her strength. Some questioned why she hadn't revealed her identity sooner, as if she owed her dignity to their timeline. Others, more sinister, attacked her, calling her arrogant, dramatic, or playing the race card. It hurt more than she expected. Then came the flashbacks, on quiet mornings, in meetings, even mid-sentence during a briefing. Her body would stiffen. Her breath would catch. She could still feel the grip on her wrist. Still hear the words, "You people always think you're above the law." She started having trouble sleeping. She checked her rearview mirror constantly. Every time she saw a patrol car, her stomach flipped. The trauma didn't care about her title. It crept into her life like smoke. The FBI offered her counseling. She accepted. But therapy didn't erase the images burned into her mind. She went back to work, sharper than ever, but something inside her had changed. Her smile came slower. Her patience was thinner. Her voice was colder. Colleagues noticed. Friends asked if she was okay. She always answered, "I'm fine." But inside she wasn't. Because the real pain wasn't just what they did to her. It was the deep realization that this wasn't about her. It was about the system. About how easily racism wrapped itself in a badge and a gun. About how many others suffered and never had the power to fight back. Ariana couldn't stop thinking about the ones who weren't FBI. The ones who were arrested, beaten, disappeared, or buried under false charges because they didn't have cameras, titles, or backup. That truth kept her up at night. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded. Kowski's record was worse than expected. Multiple complaints had been dismissed quietly over the years. Racial profiling, threats, aggression. Jenkins had a history too. Young, volatile, shielded by an old boys culture in the department. Internal Affairs was furious. The FBI's Civil Rights Unit was building a case yet so airtight it shook the police department to its core. The officers' faces were now known across the nation. Symbols of disgrace. They had been arrogant. Now they were exposed. The trial began 3 months later. Ariana sat in the courtroom each day, calm and unflinching. The prosecution laid out the footage, the fake charges, the attempted bribe, the vile slurs. The jury watched in disbelief. Kowski and Jenkins looked like shells of the men they once were. Their defense tried to spin excuses, long hours, misjudgment, lack of training, but no one was buying it. When Ariana took the stand, she didn't raise her voice, she didn't cry, she simply told the truth, word by word, minute by minute. The courtroom was silent. Every eye watched her. Every juror listened like the world depended on it. Because for those 10 minutes, Ariana Blake wasn't just a witness. She was every black woman who'd ever been pulled over, every citizen who'd ever been treated like a threat, every human being who had been reduced to their skin. The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all charges. Federal civil rights violations. Extortion. False arrest. Abuse of power. The sentencing was even more powerful. 15 years in federal prison each. No parole, no early release. A message sent loud and clear, but still, Ariana didn't smile. She didn't clap. She walked out of that courtroom with the same heavy heart. Justice had been served. But the wound remained. She returned home that night and stood again in her garage, staring at the car that changed her life. And for the first time since that awful day, she let herself cry. Not because she was weak, but because she had been strong for too long. She cried for herself, for her people, for the pain we don't always see. And then she dried her tears, straightened her back, and walked into her house like a storm passed through her, but didn't break her. Because Ariana Blake was not a victim. She was a survivor, and she would never stop fighting for the ones who couldn't fight back. Ariana Blake sat in her office, the city skyline casting long shadows across the floor, but she couldn't see the sunset. Not really. Not anymore. Something inside her had changed since the day she was dragged out of her Mercedes and thrown into the back of that police car. She'd won the trial. She'd watched her abusers sentenced to 15 years in prison. And yet, the victory didn't feel like healing. It felt like scar tissue, the kind that tightens over time and quietly aches when the world gets cold. She was still deputy director of the FBI. Her position hadn't been taken. But something far more intimate had been stolen. The sense of safety in her skin. The belief that maybe, just maybe, she had outrun the fear. But fear, she had learned, doesn't knock. It waits. Since the trial, Ariana had been the face of justice on headlines and interviews. They called her brave. They called her powerful. But no one asked what it cost. No one saw her trembling hands at night. No one saw her waking up at 3 a.m., reaching for a badge, not for pride, but to reassure herself that she was still in control. They didn't know she'd changed her driving routes, that she started wearing a plain silver watch instead of the gold one that once made her a target, that the confident woman in heels who once strode through Washington's corridors now took slower steps and flinched when an officer passed too close. The pain wasn't just physical anymore. It was in her voice, her silences, her reflection. She stared into mirrors longer, trying to recognize herself in a world that still refused to recognize her fully. And then came the emails. Hundreds. From black women, from Latino teens, from mothers, from sons. From strangers in small towns and cities, people who'd seen her story on the news or watched a clip from the courtroom on social media. People who cried when she stood on the witness stand. People who said, "I've been there. I didn't think anyone would believe me. You gave me courage." Ariana read every single one. And with each message, the ache in her heart bent into something stronger, something sharper. Purpose. She decided it wasn't enough to survive. She had to fight louder. She had to do what they never expected her to do: stand taller, speak louder, reach further. So she started showing up at community centers, at forums, at high schools. She began talking, really talking, about what happened to her. Not just the courtroom drama, but the silence that followed. The pain, the fear, the anger that still bubbled when she saw another case of wrongful arrest. She talked about what it felt like to have all the power and still be treated like you were nothing. She cried in front of audiences. Let them see her bleeding. And they cried with her. Because her story wasn't just hers. It was a mirror. A megaphone. A call to action. One day, after a particularly emotional speech at a college in Chicago, a girl no older than 19 came up to her, tears streaking down her face. She couldn't even speak at first. She just hugged Ariana, tight, desperate, trembling. When she finally pulled back, she whispered, "They did that to my brother, but he didn't make it home." Ariana's heart cracked all over again, and that night, in her hotel room, she collapsed onto the bed, clutching a photo of her own brother in uniform, and wept until her chest hurt. The pain didn't disappear, but it pushed her forward. She launched a task force inside the FBI, one that focused solely on accountability in local policing. It was met with resistance. Powerful people tried to slow her down, whispered behind closed doors, said she was too emotional, too political, too loud. But Ariana didn't blink. She met them head on. She remembered the sound of cuffs snapping against her wrists and let that memory fuel her fire. The press circled back. They wanted follow-ups, updates, more interviews. Ariana gave them honesty. She didn't sanitize the pain for comfort. She didn't round off the edges. She told the truth, raw and burning. "Justice isn't a courtroom moment," she said in one televised interview. "It's what comes after. It's what you feel alone in your room when no one is clapping anymore." But still, despite everything she was doing, despite the action, the policies, the voices lifted alongside hers, there were days the darkness crept back in. Like the night she was driving home from work, the freeway nearly empty, when a patrol car pulled behind her again. Her hands tightened on the wheel, her breath shallowed, her throat closed. She turned her signal on, heart pounding, and slowed to the side, the old fear clawing at her chest like it was brand new. But this time, they passed her. Just a normal car behind her. No lights, no sirens. But she still sat there, pulled over, parked on the side of the road, shaking in silence. Because trauma doesn't need a trigger. Sometimes it's the shadow of a memory that tears through you. That night, she didn't sleep. She stood in her kitchen at 2:17 a.m., drinking water, staring out into the dark, and she whispered to herself, "You're still here. You're still breathing." She repeated it again and again until it became a rhythm. "You're still here. You're still breathing. You're still fighting." And so she did. Every meeting, every public hearing, every press conference, every community meeting with mothers of sons who never came home. Ariana Blake showed up. And the more she showed up, the more people stood beside her. Officers who wanted reform, leaders who'd been quiet too long, survivors who'd been silent too long, victims who never thought their voices mattered. And now, you're here, listening to her story, watching her struggle, feeling her pain, seeing her fight. So if you've made it this far, press the like button, not just for her, but for everyone like her. For every person who's ever been pulled over and felt the chill of being unwanted. For every soul who's been disrespected, silenced, profiled, and forced to swallow rage. Like this video to show Ariana she's not standing alone, to show victims everywhere that we are paying attention, that we care, that the fight is still alive. Because this story isn't just about racism or abuse of power, it's about what it takes to keep going after the cameras leave, after the hashtags fade, after the courtroom doors close. Ariana Blake didn't ask for this spotlight. She didn't want to become a symbol, but life made her one. And instead of shrinking, she rose. Now it's our turn to rise with her. Because justice is a story we have to keep writing. Together. So if you believe in her fight, if you believe her pain matters, and if you believe this can never be allowed to happen again, press that like button now. Let the world know we see her, we hear her, and we stand with her. Ariana Blake is still here, still breathing, still fighting. And she's not done yet. Ariana Blake had always walked the halls of power with calm precision. She had mastered the rules, climbed the ladder, and earned her place as one of the highest-ranking black women in federal law enforcement. But after her illegal arrest and the storm that followed, she could no longer return to life as usual. Something inside her had shifted permanently. The courtroom had delivered justice, yes, but the streets still echoed with injustice, and she could feel it in every breath she took. She'd survived the worst day of her life, but deep in her soul she knew her story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. In fact, her next move would leave the country in disbelief, because what Ariana did next, no one saw coming. She disappeared. No press conference, no formal resignation, no public statement. One day she was seated at the head of an FBI task force meeting. The next? Gone. Her office was cleared out. Her phone disconnected. Even her closest aides were stunned. Rumors exploded across the media. Some said she'd gone into private security. Others claimed she was traumatized and retreating to heal. But a few whispered something stranger, that Ariana Blake had gone undercover. Again. Only a handful of people knew the truth. After the trial, Ariana received a confidential file. An informant deep inside a corrupt police alliance had reached out through secure channels. The details were unbelievable. There were officers in multiple cities, connected through encrypted networks, trading names, locations, and assets tied to false arrests, planted evidence, and in some horrific cases, disappearances. And at the center of this silent storm? A man named Dale Rourke, a retired commander known in whispers as the Architect. He wasn't just part of the corruption, he was building it, protecting it, and monetizing it. Ariana looked at the file for hours. Faces, victims, names, crossed out names. She remembered one. Ayanna Jones, a teenager whose body had been found near a river. Her case closed as an accident. But Ariana had met her mother once. She remembered the trembling hands, the way her voice cracked when she said, "They never let my baby come home." Now here was Ayanna's name, on a list marked neutralized. That was the moment Ariana knew. The system hadn't just failed. It was actively killing people, and this time it wasn't enough to expose it from the podium. She had to go into the belly of the beast. So she crafted an identity. Rachel Monroe, a private consultant for high-level security audits, burned out and cynical, with just enough of a paper trail to be believable. She changed her appearance. Darker curls, a new accent, no trace of the woman who once sat beside senators and FBI brass. She embedded herself inside a security firm with known ties to ex-police enforcers, a place where looking the other way was standard procedure. And from there, she infiltrated the network, one piece at a time. What she uncovered in the next 10 months would terrify even the strongest hearts. Officers paid to frame activists. Judges accepting sealed envelopes to shift verdicts. Warehouses used to store seized property never filed into evidence. A digital chain of messages confirming that several unsolved deaths had been intentional removals. It wasn't just abuse, it was an empire. Built on silence, protected by fear. Ariana risked everything. She wore hidden recorders to late-night meetings in smoke-filled basements. She shared drinks with killers pretending to be heroes. She sat across from Dale Rourke himself, his eyes cold, his charm slick, and let him believe she was just like him. She smiled as he spoke about cleaning the system. She laughed when he mocked the weak. She waited for the right moment, and it came, during a private retreat at an off-the-grid facility where the inner circle gathered to discuss next moves. Ariana had already sent encrypted drops to the FBI. But this was the final piece. She slipped into a restricted communications room and pulled the entire contents of their network archive. Years of messages, financial records, digital proof. But the alarm tripped. A guard spotted her. What followed was a chaotic, near-fatal escape through a rainstorm in the forest surrounding the compound. Ariana ran for hours, her shoes torn, her ankle twisted, drenched, freezing, bleeding from her shoulder where a branch had sliced her open. She reached a highway just before dawn and collapsed into the road, holding the hard drive close to her chest like it was her heartbeat. A truck driver saw her and called for help. When she woke up in a hospital 48 hours later, FBI agents were already guarding the door. She had done it. She'd cracked the case that law enforcement had denied for years. The files she recovered led to the largest internal takedown in decades. Rourke was arrested. 32 officers across 5 states were indicted. 3 judges, 2 prosecutors, and 6 private contractors were exposed. And Ariana Blake, now public again, walked into the press conference wearing the same heels they'd dragged her out of a year earlier. This time her voice didn't shake. She looked straight into the camera and said, "This is not over. This is just the beginning." The world reacted with awe. People said she was fearless, that she'd done what no one else could. But Ariana knew the truth. She had been terrified. She had cried herself to sleep in unfamiliar motel rooms. She had written goodbye letters she never sent. She had stared at her own reflection in bathroom mirrors and asked, "What if this is the last time I ever see myself alive?" But she did it anyway. Because somewhere, a girl like Ariana was still waiting for someone to fight for her. Ariana would always be that someone. And now that you know everything, we want to hear from you. What would you say to Ariana Blake if she were sitting across from you right now? Would you thank her for risking her life? Would you tell her she's not alone? Would you say, "I'm with you now"? Drop it in the comments below. She may see it. And even if she doesn't, your words matter. Encourage her. Uplift her. Let her know we see her. We believe her. We stand with her. And if you felt your chest tighten while hearing her story, if you whispered, "What?" when she vanished, or held your breath when she ran through that storm, press the like button right now. It's not just a click. It's a signal that you care, that her story matters, that what she risked wasn't in vain. Ariana Blake didn't just survive injustice. She hunted it down. She exposed the unseen. She fought battles we didn't even know were happening. She bled in the dark so that truth could live in the light. And her journey? It's still going. Because while the villains she uncovered sit behind bars, Ariana is building something bigger. A nationwide protection system for whistleblowers, victims of racial profiling, and families caught in the cracks of corruption. She's speaking in front of Congress next. And rumor has it, she may be stepping into politics. But for now, she's watching to see if we still care. So show her we do. Comment below. Encourage her. Like this story, Because Ariana Blake didn't just risk her career, she risked her life. For truth. And stories like this? They deserve to be remembered forever. There are moments that change a person, not just their path, but their soul. For Ariana Blake, it was the moment her hands were twisted behind her back and cold steel clamped down on her wrists for the crime of being black and successful. It was the moment two police officers looked her dead in the eye and saw not a woman, not a human being, not the deputy director of the FBI, but a target. It began as a routine drive home, the end of a long day filled with strategy meetings and federal briefings. But when she saw the flashing red and blue lights behind her, it became something far more dangerous. It became a fight for her dignity, her name, her very existence. That moment in the mirror, that's when she knew. This wasn't about speeding. This was about her skin. She pulled over, every movement precise, lawful, and calm. She had done nothing wrong, but wrong didn't matter. The officers walked up to her window like predators who'd caught their prey. One of them smiled, not kindly. The other stayed back, one hand on his gun, watching her every breath like she might explode. The questions came sharp and insulting. What do you do for a living? How can you afford this car? And then, the offer. A bribe. Give us money, or we make your life difficult. And when she refused, the mask fell off. The fake professionalism vanished. What remained was a boiling storm of racism, contempt, and unchecked power. They yanked her out of the car, hurled slurs that cut deeper than fists, and threw her into the back of a patrol vehicle like she was trash. But Ariana never stopped watching, never stopped remembering. Every word, every insult, every second. Because even as they humiliated her, she was already writing the ending in her mind. Her body may have been caged in that moment, but her mind was building a storm. At the police station, when they shoved her toward the duty desk, and Sergeant Miller asked the simple question, occupation, the truth landed like thunder. Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Silence. Then chaos. The men who had spit on her name now fell to their knees, weeping, begging, trembling like leaves in a storm. But for Ariana, it wasn't satisfying, because her wounds still bled. And the truth? It should have mattered before the badge, before the title. She should have been respected simply for being human. But that wasn't the world she lived in. What followed was a whirlwind. Arrests, investigations, media firestorms, courtroom trials. The country watched. The names Kowski and Jenkins became infamous, their smug grins replaced by fear and shame. Ariana testified, her voice calm and precise, telling the world what was done to her. Not just for herself, but for the thousands who never got the chance to speak. For the mothers who buried sons. For the daughters who stopped trusting officers. For the people who silently carried trauma like chains. But what people didn't see was what happened after the courtroom closed. Ariana would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, her wrists throbbing from phantom pain. She'd sit in her parked car, unable to drive, heart racing when a police cruiser rolled by. She'd hear the slurs echo in her head when she closed her eyes. There were mornings she couldn't breathe, nights she couldn't sleep. Because trauma doesn't vanish with justice. It lingers in the bones, in the voice, in the quiet corners of the day. And yet, she refused to be broken. She poured her soul into change. She started reform initiatives, pushed policies that challenged long-standing abuse, and faced down resistance from inside the system. She knew some colleagues whispered behind her back, called her too emotional, said she was using her story. But Ariana didn't care, because her story was real, and it was powerful. She met with families who'd lost loved ones to police brutality. She visited schools, told teenagers that what happened to her should never happen to them. She walked into town halls where pain hung in the air like smoke, and she stood tall in it. And every time she stepped up to a microphone, she carried her scars with her. Not to show weakness, but to show strength. Because if she could survive that day and still speak, so could others. But there was one moment that truly broke her. It was during a quiet afternoon, nearly a year after the trial. She visited the place where it all began, the stretch of road where she had been pulled over. The sunlight was almost the same, the breeze soft, but she felt none of its peace. She parked her car and just sat there. She looked at the trees, at the street signs, at the empty space where 2 officers once destroyed her dignity, and she broke. Tears poured down her face, not in rage, but in mourning. Not just for what was done to her, but for what could have happened, for how close she came to becoming a hashtag. If she hadn't stayed calm, if she hadn't refused to resist, if they'd been a little angrier, a little more violent, would she have survived? She cried for the what if, and when she wiped her tears, she made a vow. Never again. Never again would she drive past injustice and stay silent. Never again would she let people forget that the system could chew up even the most powerful, the most prepared, the most law-abiding, if they looked the wrong way. So she turned her pain into a platform. She wrote op-eds. She joined national task forces. She pushed legislation that would have protected women like her before a uniform ever touched their wrist. She built a nationwide campaign called Badge or Not, reminding people that no title protects you when racism decides who you are. And she kept showing up. Even when the nightmares returned. Even when the world wanted to move on. Even when people told her to just be grateful it ended the way it did. Because deep down, Ariana knew it should have never started that way. And today, you know the truth. You've walked with her through the fire. You saw her racially profiled. You saw her handcuffed, insulted, dragged like she was less than human. You saw the risk she faced, the split-second decisions that could have cost her life. You saw her rise in the courtroom, and now you see what it truly takes to heal. Not just courage, but consistency. Not just anger, but action. Not just justice, but transformation. So now, it's your turn. If Ariana's story moved you, if her strength inspired you, if her pain made you pause, press the like button right now. Not for clicks, not for views, but for Ariana Blake, and for every soul who's ever been profiled, violated, or silenced because of the color of their skin. Press like to say, I see you, I believe you, I support you, because this isn't just her story, it's ours. And if we don't stand with her now, when will we? So take a moment, feel it, let her courage touch your heart, then click that like and join the fight. Because Ariana risked everything to survive that day, and she's still risking everything today, so others don't have to. Let's stand with her. Let's make her story mean more than pain. Let's make it mean change. There's a certain kind of pain that lingers in the soul. Not loud, not always visible, but sharp, like glass under the skin. And Ariana Blake had been carrying that pain long before the world knew her name. What the cameras saw, the courtroom, the handcuffs, the headlines, was only the surface. But the truth? The truth was buried deeper, in the silent spaces of her life, where no spotlight could reach. It started with flashing lights behind her on an ordinary drive home, and ended with a nation holding its breath. But in between those two moments was a journey filled with trauma, heartbreak, and an inner war she fought alone. She had only wanted peace that evening, the kind of quiet that follows a long day of commanding rooms, navigating law enforcement chaos, and shielding her agents from political storms. Ariana was strong, had always been strong. The only black woman at her level in the bureau, the one everyone pointed to when they needed hope or proof that change was possible. But even strength has its limits. And that night, as she drove her Mercedes through the quiet suburbs, she let herself breathe. Just for a moment. She turned up the music, loosened her grip on the wheel, let the setting sun warm her face. It felt like peace. Until it didn't. The siren was short, sharp, and without cause. The red and blue lights flashed behind her like a warning from another life. And suddenly, peace shattered. In its place came suspicion, accusation, racism dressed in a badge. She pulled over with the calm of someone who had been trained to obey, someone who had memorized the rules of survival. But even then, she knew it wouldn't matter. The officers approached with eyes that didn't see her humanity, only her skin, her car, her presence in a place they didn't think she belonged. What followed was a spiral of lies. You were speeding. Your windows are too dark. This looks suspicious. And then came the suggestion. A bribe, a threat disguised as a favor. Ariana refused, of course. She always refused corruption. She had faced criminals more dangerous than these two men, and never once compromised her integrity. But her strength only angered them. And when she said no, the nightmare truly began. Dragged from her vehicle, handcuffed, slurred at, humiliated, thrown into the back of a squad car like she was nothing. It was violent, it was degrading, and it was illegal. But to them, it was routine. Another day, another black person to put in a cage. And Ariana endured it in silence, because she knew fighting back would only make it worse, because she knew that even with her title, her badge, her years of service, she was still just a body to them, still just another suspect. That night in the police station, as they shoved her toward the front desk, something inside her almost broke. Her wrists ached, her back was sore, her voice trembled with unspoken fury. And yet when they asked for her occupation, Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation, she delivered it like a bullet. The silence that followed was deafening, the panic on their faces, immediate. But it didn't bring her joy. It didn't erase the pain. It only reminded her how close she had come to disappearing. And the worst part? That night could have ended differently. One wrong move, one nervous twitch, one officer with an even shorter fuse. She could have become a name trending under a hashtag, a headline, a funeral, another story of what could have been. And that realization stayed with her, long after the apologies came, long after the officers were charged, even long after the courtroom verdict handed her a rare victory. Because justice doesn't erase trauma, it only puts it on a timeline. And Ariana's timeline was filled with pain. The days after the trial were some of the hardest. She was hailed as a hero, a symbol, a voice for the voiceless. But in private, she was crumbling. She couldn't sleep, couldn't drive at night, couldn't walk past a police cruiser without her chest tightening. The very institution she'd devoted her life to had turned on her in a moment. And though the culprits had faces and names, the system that enabled them remained. She knew it. She felt it. Every time a reporter asked her how she stayed so composed. Every time a colleague praised her restraint, as if dignity was a shield, as if survival was owed. And so she pulled away. From interviews, from the spotlight, from the world. She spent weeks alone, reading case files, reviewing videos, writing letters to the families of victims who hadn't lived to see justice. She visited graves, lit candles, sat with mothers who cried into her shoulder and asked, "Why didn't anyone believe my child?" Those moments broke her open. And in that brokenness, she found a different kind of strength. Not the kind you wear like armor, but the kind you build. She started small, gathering data, connecting with civil rights attorneys, listening to community leaders. Then she pushed bigger, forming a bipartisan commission to investigate systemic profiling, partnering with tech experts to develop AI systems that could detect patterns of misconduct in real time. She didn't just fight back. She redesigned the battlefield. But it wasn't easy. She faced pushback. Thinly veiled threats, anonymous messages telling her to stop digging. People tried to discredit her, said she was exaggerating, said she was unstable after the arrest. But she didn't stop, because Ariana Blake had already been silenced once, and she'd sworn never again. And in time, the tide began to turn. Police departments were forced to re-examine their internal cultures. Officers were held accountable for past infractions. Laws were drafted to criminalize targeted profiling. Her name became synonymous with reform, not because she demanded it, but because she lived it. But even in triumph, she carried the weight of what she'd endured. One evening, at a quiet memorial for a victim she never met, Ariana stood under a tree and looked up at the stars. Her eyes filled with tears. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel everything. The fear, the rage, the sorrow, the loneliness. She whispered a prayer, not just for herself, but for every soul who never got to speak their truth. And in that moment, something shifted. Not the pain. It was still there. But the purpose? It was clearer than ever. She would keep fighting, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Because silence is a luxury too many don't have. Because being strong isn't a choice, it's survival. Because the little girl she once was, the one who watched her father get pulled from his car without cause, who sat in the back seat crying silently, deserved better. And now that you know her story, every single step of it, what will you do? Will you forget her the way systems forget people like her? Or will you honor her courage by standing beside her? Will you speak her name in rooms where injustice echoes? Will you press like on this story, not for the algorithm, but for the truth? Because Ariana Blake didn't just live through a nightmare. She fought through it. She rose from it. And now she's lifting others with her. So if you believe her journey matters, if her strength moved you, if her story opened your eyes, press the like button right now. Let it be a message to her, to the world, to anyone who's ever felt powerless. We see you. We hear you. We believe you. Ariana Blake is proof that justice may bend, but with enough strength, enough pain, and enough truth, it will never break. And if you feel what she felt, even for a second, leave a comment. Let her know you're here, because in this fight, every voice counts, especially yours. In the end, what remained wasn't the pain, the fear, or the humiliation. What remained was the legacy, not of what happened to Ariana Blake, but of what she chose to do afterward. She had been targeted because of the color of her skin, insulted, illegally arrested, dragged like a criminal through the very system she had spent her life serving. And yes, For a moment, they made her feel small. For a moment, they made her question if it was all worth it. But the truth is, when the world tried to break her, Ariana Blake didn't crumble. She transformed. Now, months after the dust had settled, Ariana stood on a different kind of stage. Not in a courtroom, not behind an FBI seal, but in front of a community gathering in the very town where her nightmare had started. Families sat in folding chairs. Teenagers leaned forward on their elbows. Elders nodded slowly, as if her every word touched something they'd carried their whole lives. She didn't wear a uniform that day. No badge, no heels. Just a simple white blouse and jeans, like any other person who came to speak the truth. She looked out at them, not as a federal agent, not as a victim, but as a witness. A witness to what can happen when racism is ignored. A witness to what it means to be brave even when you're afraid. A witness to what can grow from the ashes of injustice if you don't give up. Her voice was soft, but steady. They tried to take everything from me that day. My dignity, my identity, my voice. But what they gave me instead was a fire I didn't even know I still had. I survived because I knew who I was, even when they refused to see it. And now I'm here, because someone out there needs to know that survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. The room went silent. The kind of silence where you can hear hearts beating. And in that stillness, Ariana smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because she knew now that it could be. That speech became one of many. Ariana went on to create one of the most impactful civil justice initiatives in the country, the Blake Project, dedicated to fighting racial profiling, empowering falsely accused individuals, and training law enforcement in anti-bias education. She didn't stop there. She launched scholarships for Black youth interested in public service, built a legal hotline for victims of wrongful arrest, formed policy teams to audit departments from the inside. She turned her story into a movement. And while the media eventually moved on to the next headline, Ariana didn't. She kept going, city by city, case by case, person by person. Because she knew this fight was bigger than her. Because it was never just about her arrest. It was about the system that allowed it, the culture that excused it, the silence that protected it. But she also knew change is possible. Not fast, not easy, but real. She met a boy named Malik, who told her he wanted to become a civil rights lawyer because of her testimony. She got a letter from a retired police officer who admitted that her story made him confront things he'd buried for decades. And now, he was training rookies differently. She stood beside a mother in Baton Rouge who had lost her son in a wrongful traffic stop, and together, they introduced legislation that is now saving lives. This was what justice looked like, not a moment, but a movement. And as Ariana's story came full circle, the advice she gave others wasn't wrapped in legal jargon or political slogans. It was human, real, soft but strong. And maybe it's what you need to hear today too. She said, "Know who you are, especially when they try to tell you what you're not. Speak, even when your voice shakes. Stand, even when you're tired. Believe in your worth, even when the world doesn't. Never let someone else's ignorance decide your future. And when the storm comes, and it will, don't ask why you. Ask, what will I do with this pain? And here's what you can do right now, wherever you are. Use your voice. If you see injustice, say something. Share it. Stand with people like Ariana. Support the truth. Like this story, comment your thoughts. Let survivors know they are seen, they are heard, and they are not alone. Be part of the change. Educate yourself. Vote with your heart. Teach your children the truth, not just the safe version. Ariana Blake risked everything to make sure this story didn't end with her. And now, it's in your hands. So if her story moved you, if you felt your chest tighten as she was dragged from her car, if your heart broke when you realized even the deputy director of the FBI wasn't safe from racial profiling, if you cheered when the officers who violated her were finally brought to justice, if you breathed deeper knowing that she turned pain into purpose, click the like button. Do it not just for Ariana, but for everyone still waiting for justice. For every person who's ever been wrongly accused, wrongly stopped, wrongly hurt. And don't stop there. Comment below. Leave a message for Ariana. Tell her how her story made you feel. Share what it reminded you of. Speak your heart. Whether it's a sentence or a whole letter, your voice matters. Because this channel is more than a platform. It's a home for real stories, for real people. And if you want to keep hearing the truth, if you want to keep supporting characters who don't just survive but rise, subscribe now. Hit that bell icon so you never miss the next story. Because what happened to Ariana isn't rare, but how she responded? That's extraordinary. Let's lift her up. Let's lift up all of them. This is more than content. This is connection. This is how we say, we believe you. We stand with you. We are with you until the end. So yes, this is the end of Ariana Blake's story, for now, but the ripples of her courage are still moving through the world. And who knows, the next story we tell might be about someone in your city, your neighborhood, or even you. Because justice doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts in the hearts of people who refuse to look away. And if you've read this far, if you've felt something real deep inside, then you're already part of the movement. Thank you for walking this road with Ariana. She didn't just survive. She changed everything.